For most of her life, Celine Dion seemed unstoppable. She had one of the most recognizable voices in the world. She sold millions of records. She performed in front of enormous crowds. And whenever she walked onto a stage, she seemed completely at home. But behind the bright lights and standing ovations, something was happening that would eventually change her life. At first, the public did not fully understand what was wrong. Celine began canceling performances. Shows were postponed. Then more dates disappeared from her schedule. Fans became worried. For a woman who had spent decades performing at the highest level, suddenly stepping away from the stage was unusual. Then, in December of 2022, Celine finally shared the heartbreaking truth. She revealed that she had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition called stiff person syndrome. The diagnosis explained many of the physical problems she had been experiencing. Celine said she had been dealing with severe muscle spasms. The condition affected her daily life. It affected her ability to walk normally at times. And perhaps most painfully of all, it affected something that had been part of her identity since she was a child: her ability to sing. For millions of fans, it was difficult to imagine. Celine Dion had always seemed to possess a voice without limits. She could stand almost completely still on a stage and somehow fill an entire arena with emotion. But suddenly, singing was no longer something she could take for granted. Her own body was making it difficult for her to do the thing she loved most. And so, Celine was forced to step away. Her planned performances were canceled. Her future on stage became uncertain. And one of the greatest singers of her generation largely disappeared from public view. But what fans saw from the outside was only part of the story. Behind closed doors, Celine was fighting a much more difficult battle. She began working with medical professionals. She underwent treatment and physical therapy. She worked on her strength. She worked on her movement. And she worked toward controlling the symptoms that had changed her everyday life. There was no simple solution. There was no magical moment when everything suddenly returned to normal. This was something she had to learn to manage. Day after day. Step after step. Then, in 2024, the world saw just how serious her struggle could become. Her documentary, I Am, Celine Dion, gave viewers an unusually personal look at her life. This was not the Celine Dion people were used to seeing. There were no giant stages. No glamorous costumes. No roaring crowds. Instead, viewers saw the woman behind the superstar. And one particular moment became almost impossible to forget. During the documentary, Celine experienced a severe physical episode while receiving treatment. Her body became rigid. She struggled as the people around her tried to help. For fans who had spent decades watching her confidently command some of the biggest stages in the world, the scene was deeply upsetting. Suddenly, the reality of her condition was impossible to ignore. This was not simply a singer taking some time away. Celine was fighting for control of her own body. And yet, even during this incredibly difficult period, she refused to give up on the possibility of performing again. Music had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. She grew up in a large musical family in Quebec. She began performing when she was very young. Eventually, her extraordinary voice carried her far beyond Canada. She became an international superstar. Songs like The Power of Love, Because You Loved Me, and My Heart Will Go On became part of popular culture. Her Las Vegas performances helped redefine what a major residency could become. For decades, singing was not simply her career. It was her life. And now she was fighting to keep that part of herself. The health battle also came after years of personal heartbreak. In January of 2016, Celine lost her husband, René Angelil. René was much more than her husband. He had also been a central figure in her career. He believed in her talent when she was still very young. He helped guide her journey from a young singer in Quebec to one of the most successful recording artists in the world. They built a family together. They built a life together. And when Renee died after a battle with cancer, Celine lost the person who had stood beside her through much of her extraordinary journey. Still, she continued. She returned to performing. She raised her children. She kept moving forward. Then came the health problems. This time, the battle was happening inside her own body. There were moments when the future seemed uncertain. Would she ever perform a full concert again? Would she be able to control her voice the way she once had? Would fans ever see Celine Dion standing beneath the lights again? Nobody could know for certain. Then came July of 2024. The Olympic Games opened in Paris. The ceremony was filled with spectacular performances. But near the end of the evening, something happened that millions of people around the world had been hoping to see. Celine Dion appeared. Standing high on the Eiffel Tower, she prepared to sing. It was one of her first major public performances since revealing her diagnosis. And the location could hardly have been more dramatic. Paris was beneath her. The world was watching. Then Celine began to sing. She performed Edith Piaf's Hymn à l'amour. For anyone who knew what she had been through, the moment carried an entirely different meaning. This was not simply another performance. This was a woman returning to the place she had spent years fighting to reach again. Every note represented something larger. The performance did not mean that her condition had disappeared. It did not mean that her health battle was suddenly over. But for those few minutes, Celine Dion was back where millions of people remembered her. Under the lights. In front of the world. Singing. And when she finished, the emotion surrounding the moment was impossible to ignore. Because people now understood what it had taken for her to get there. They understood that behind that performance were years of uncertainty. There had been canceled shows. Painful symptoms. Hours of therapy. Private struggles. And moments when performing again may have seemed impossibly far away. That is what makes Celine Dion's story so heartbreaking. She achieved almost everything a singer could dream of achieving. She became famous around the world. She won major awards. She sold an extraordinary number of records. She performed for millions of people. But none of that could protect her from loss. And none of it could protect her from illness. The voice that had given so much joy to other people suddenly became something she had to fight to use. But there is another side to this story. Celine is still fighting. She has continued working on managing her condition. She has continued appearing publicly when possible. And she has continued talking about her desire to perform. Her journey is not a simple story of tragedy. And it is not a perfect comeback story either. The truth is somewhere in between. She is living with a serious condition while trying to reclaim as much of her life as possible. Some days may be better than others. Some goals may take longer than expected. And the future may not look exactly like the past. But Celine Dion has made one thing clear. She is not ready to let music disappear from her life. Perhaps that is why her story touches so many people. Fans remember the Celine who seemed almost invincible. They remember the enormous voice. The dramatic performances. The laughter. The energy. And the woman who could walk onto a stage and make everything look effortless. Now, they understand something they could not see before. Behind that famous voice is a human being who has experienced enormous loss. A woman who has faced fear and uncertainty. A mother trying to remain strong for her family. And an artist fighting to hold onto the gift that changed her life. The tragic news about Celine Dion is not that she has stopped fighting. She hasn't. The heartbreaking truth is that she has had to fight so hard just to do something that once came naturally. To stand. To move. To control her body. And to sing. When Celine appeared above Paris and her voice filled the night again, the world witnessed something that once seemed uncertain. She was performing again. Maybe not in the same way as before. Maybe with a greater understanding of how fragile everything can be. But she was there. And she was singing. Her health journey continues. Her future remains her own to write. And nobody can know exactly what the next chapter will bring. But after everything Celine Dion has survived, one thing remains impossible to deny. The voice may have faced silence. The woman behind it may have faced unimaginable challenges. But Celine Dion is still here. Still fighting. Still hoping. And whenever she is able to stand beneath those lights again, millions of people will be waiting to hear her sing.